1 in 4 of your customers use something other than the leader in the space. Would you want to shut your door to 1 in 4 people that are trying to find your business?
Hello and welcome to the Jumpstart podcast with Jeffalytics. I'm your host, Jeff Sauer. Today, for our 58th episode, we're going to talk with Christi Olson, Head of Evangelism for Bing. Christi and I met recently at the MnSearch Summit, where we both spoke at the June event, and I'm not sure that she's had a chance to rest ever since. We recorded this podcast after she flew across the country to deliver a talk on the East Coast of the U.S., and she was flying back to the West Coast as soon as we got off the line. Now that's dedication. When she said that she would like to join me on the podcast, I did one of those happy dances that you see in most 1980s teen movies. Fortunately for me, there's no tapes of that alleged dance. The only tapes that exist are my conversation with Christi, and I'm going to give those over to you in their entirety. Now, I'm so excited to get to our conversation with Christi because the conversation covered the past, the present, and the future of search. We covered a lot of ground in our talk, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on the introduction. I just want to get right to the good stuff. So the sooner I can start to talk about voice search, artificial intelligence, and the role that marketers play in their own future, the better we're going to be. So let's get into our candid conversation with one of the most ambitious people that I've ever met in the world of search. Visit jeffalytics.com/Olson for show notes. Okay, so we're here today with Christi Olson. Christi, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you. We met not too long ago at MnSearch, and you've sort of been all over the place since then and doing all kinds of cool stuff. So I wanted to learn about your entry and your experience in digital marketing. So let's start with the question we ask everybody, and that is, what got you into this wild world of digital marketing?
I think it's a fun question to answer because I got into it in sort of a roundabout way. It actually starts in the 80s with my dad. My dad saw the future of computers. He was a mechanic, just loved what he saw with computers and how the technology was being shaped, and knew that he needed to get my sister and myself involved in technology. And so I remember mid-1980s, he brought home a Commodore 64, and he would spend time with me and my sister teaching us how to use it. And while I don't think any other kids I know in that time frame were even using computers, he got us started at such a young age. And then I remember when the internet came out, he ran essentially into making sure that we had access and getting us up to speed and teaching it. And so I remember in high school, after I'd do sports, I'd come home in the evenings and spend time on ICQ and GeoCities and trying to learn how to use the internet. And I never thought I'd be able to parlay into a career. I mean, when I went to college, it wasn't really even an option to study internet or digital marketing. I had a single class that talked about the internet in the early 2000s, and literally was the internet was the broad topic. And so I graduated college and went out into the wide world of sales. And from there, I just started selling products and services and working on brand marketing. And it was probably about the 2004 timeframe that I met a gentleman, Ron Lunan, who headed up Visible Technologies. And he sort of introduced me to SEM and SEO. And I mean, I'd been playing in HTML, and I had a Trapper Keeper binder from the 90s with printed out HTML guides that I would reference and use, but I had no idea about optimizing for search engines. So to me, it was really exciting to see I could actually take something I loved and did in the evenings in my spare time and actually parlay it into a job. And so it was a little bit crazy because I had this really good career in sales and working with Philip Morris in brand marketing, that I took a leap and I sort of jumped into the world of being on a tiny agency doing SEM and SEO, and discovered that I really loved it. And I love the fact that it's something that I wanted to spend more time doing, and that businesses needed it. I've been in sales where you sell a product that maybe you don't really stand behind or you don't love. And the fact that businesses are needing to get their information, their data out there. I love the fact that search helps with that, and that I could be a part of helping businesses get found, helping businesses grow. And just from there, it's been a pretty amazing ride that I started at Visible Technologies when I was 4 or 5 people. I had some amazing mentors. Ron sort of founded the company, but this woman, Angelina Jansen, taught me the basics of paid search. And then Jennifer Matthews taught me the basics of SEO, because I could sell the products. I just didn't know what I was doing on the back end. And from there, their mentorship and their guidance was able to get me the experience I needed to apply for a job at Microsoft. And when I applied at Microsoft, there really weren't people running search. There was a couple of agencies managing it. And so in the I think it was late 2005, early 2006, I applied for a job with MSN running their search program. And I started as a vendor, and I still remember like people come in, it was in an engineering group, and they'd look at me and be like, what do you do in engineering? And it's like, oh, I do the search engine side. I work on search. And what was interesting is what we were doing back then was a lot of like almost arbitrage. We were buying keywords to help support the display business. So that when somebody came to MSN, we would essentially say, oh, do we have enough page views to support all the display campaigns on the back end? If not, we would go and buy search keywords to drive traffic into those sites. And what we found was that we're spending a lot of time looking at information and trying to keep everything automated up and running. But we didn't have a lot of tools that we needed. We didn't have data on the back end to really show success. And so one of the interesting things getting involved in search at such an early age is analytics had just started coming out. And so parlaying love of data, I worked with our internal team and Kevin Wu to figure out like, how do we implement Omniture? How do we get data to actually show the value behind search? And from there, getting Omniture implemented and getting access to data, figuring out how we can do performance, we were then able to figure out some automation on the search campaign side and automate getting access to information to show the value behind it. And it actually ended up turning into being able to report it back to our management chain and them going, wow, we can do so much more with search.
That's awesome though. So it's really cool that you know, all of our inner geeks can recognize that experience of like wanting to liking the internet, but then wondering, can you make money off of this? Like I always thought you could make money off of it, but I never knew that there was no jobs, right? So when you go through this process, there's no jobs in the internet. You sort of have to find somebody who's willing to take a chance on you or find something to happen. And it sounds like you were able to do that. And not only that, but you were able to keep on progressing as you went along. And so it's cool that, you know, not too long after this, you're moving along. And then now you're working at Microsoft, which is a big deal, right? But it also seems like it's like a big deal from a company standpoint, but also they have some of the same problems or the same opportunities that you'd see in any company trying to harness the internet.
Yeah, and I have to say it was pretty amazing. So like one of my dreams, like it goes back to being the inner nerd back in my GeoCity days, was like, oh my gosh, if I could do anything, I would love to work at Microsoft. It was like a dream of mine. And then I took coding classes in college, and I just could not imagine myself being a coder. I tried, and I just was like, I am too much of a people person. I would go crazy spending all day just coding on the back end. And so I sort of fell into marketing. I loved it. And then to see that Microsoft had opportunities where I can be somewhat technical. And I have to say I was a lot more technical than a lot of the marketers I worked with. So that's why they put me in the engineering group. And to be able to take that and actually develop a career and to develop a team. And something that's probably a little known fact, it was really fun, that original team within MSN, what happened from that team, I was on the paid search side, and there's a counterpart that a lot of people know of, but Dwayne Forrester came in to sort of lead that SEO team. And so Dwayne was leading SEO and I was leading paid search, and we were trying to figure out, how do we do this from a scale perspective? What are the tools we need? How do we develop things so that it's not just what we do ourselves, but how do we enable the rest of Microsoft, the rest of individuals to take what we're doing and what we're learning and put it into the other business groups? And so I have to say that I was so incredibly blessed because they took a chance on me. I'd had only like a year and a half of search experience to actually come in and start running the program. But then they took a chance on me to help build some tool sets. And so I think one of the funnest things I've ever done, and even to this day, I'm like, oh, I want to figure out how do I get back into it, was identifying the need for, it was back in the Panama Google AdWords. It wasn't Bing at that time. It was MSN Ad Center or Live Search, went through a couple of iterations, Miva, Find What, Look Smart, all those tools, creating a bulk sheet. Because as crazy it sounds today, people are like, oh yeah, I just log into Editor. There was an editor. Each individual platform had a separate bulk sheet that you had to access, and each of them had a very different format and a different structure and setup. And so we got to work with an engineering team to create a tool that essentially became the first bulk editing tool. to make updates and changes and publish them out across the different platforms. And so as Dwayne was working on what became Webmaster Tools and SEO tool sets, I got to do the same thing on the paid search side and work on bid algorithms. And how do you do it when it's normally just you and a spreadsheet? And I have to say, it's something that really made me fall in love with search and made me fall in love with digital marketing and say, like, I want this as my career and I want to continue figuring out how do you not only take the challenges you have in digital marketing, but how do you cross the different channels, take analytics, learn analytics, and then bring it all together to create this amazing, seamless marketing experience.
Yeah, I mean, that's got to be a really cool opportunity. It's, obviously when you're with something that has a search engine and you have these things out there, there's all kinds of things you can do, all kinds of opportunities, all kinds of data. But I personally benefited from you creating the tool, right? From the bulk upload tool, because before that it was a very, like you said, a manual process. Each one had their own format, and not only did they have their own format, but you had to like talk to an account rep in order to even get something to happen. And so it's like you can definitely have a huge impact, and I can imagine that being on that side becomes addicting almost, like, because you have so much opportunity, you have so much ability to bring reach not only to your organization, which is probably a very engineering or computer science heavy organization, but then also to other people as well, the people who are using these things. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I have to say, had it not been for working with so many wicked smart, and I know I'm not from Boston, but I'll use wicked as the example, wicked smart people that could actually take, like, I'm not technical, but saying, here's our requirements, here's what we need. I don't know how to build it on the back end, but this is how it should work, how it should function. Taking that and helping us build out those requirements, define it, scope it, and create a tool set. When Bing launched in the 2009 timeframe, I still am baffled. I still can't believe we actually did it in the timeframe. So Bing launched, I believe it was either May or June of 2009. In October of 2008, my manager came to me and said, I've got this side project. It'll take maybe 10, 15 minutes a week. You'll need to build out some keywords. We acquired this company that's like a shopping company, MSN Shopping. We want the integration on the back end. I essentially got handed what became Bing Cashback or Bing Shopping. And we had to figure out, how do you support about a 250 million product database with keywords for this beta program we were looking on, the Shopbot or Bing Cashback, which put a icon next to the ad, and you could actually get money back for every purchase you made. So we had less than, I think it came out to like 5 or 6 months to create about a 200 million or over 200 million keyword campaign, both on Google and Bing, to support a brand new net new product. Had we not had tool sets, we would never have been able to actually come out and launch that account. It was it goes back to like technology and tools enabling you to do things. It was crazy that we were able to actually support that launch in such a quick time. And I couldn't have done it without my team. And they were just amazing to see how we could build so quickly.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's still difficult to do for one company with one database of products that, we're talking hundreds of products or thousands of products. It's still a 6-month project just for one company. So I can only imagine for like the whole internet. So you mentioned, you talk about analytics and how you like that and also using tools. One question I had is about being at Microsoft, which is a engineering centric organization. Was the temptation on their end to try things off the shelf? Would they even allow you to try things that were off the shelf, or did everybody want to build it themselves? Did they say, hey, let's build this instead of buying Omniture, instead of using, obviously you're probably not gonna be able to use Google Analytics for many reasons. How does that work to choose tools to get these things out there?
I think it's a little bit like any other company, and I can speak from my own experiences that, like, from an analytics standpoint, there was a team developing an internal type of analytics, but it wasn't ready yet. And so we needed something. And so that's partially why they went with Omniture at the time, was because we needed to be able to understand what was happening on the website and how to create, it was both a content perspective as well as a marketing perspective. Was our marketing effective? So that we could measure and say, should we be allocating more dollars or less dollars based on overall performance. Now, the interesting Microsoft is there is the ability to say, we do need something that might not exist today. Can we put together the business case to build it? And that's sort of where like the SEO tool set came from that Dwayne worked on, was because there wasn't a tool out there, and he saw the need and he saw the gap. And so they gave him the resources to build and to be able to build it. And same with me, is there wasn't a tool set that we could use. I mean, from a paid search perspective, we had been using the tools that were available, but they weren't quite enough. It wasn't enough. It was enough to keep afloat, but it wasn't enough to like be amazing at our jobs. And so I do have to say, because it is engineering, a lot of engineering background, it gave us that opportunity that I probably wouldn't have gotten at a lot of other companies.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also you just have so many users and so much opportunity that the business case should be pretty straight. I'm not saying straightforward, and I don't want to undermine how hard it is to get anybody to do anything in this world. But a good idea versus a good idea that could potentially bring in revenue, for example, like getting, one of the main reasons why people won't port their campaigns over to Bing, or they won't build Bing campaigns, is because they just don't want to deal with learning a new system. They don't want to spend the time to do it, or there's many, these reasons. If you can eliminate those reasons, you're going to get more people advertising on your system. And so there's a pretty clear business case that if you move things over and you give somebody, if you take away any reason to not do it, then people are going to do it more often.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I have to say, like I was on the team that launched Bing back in 2009, but I was actually running paid search on behalf of Bing to bring traffic into Bing. So it's sort of a fun one. I was doing search for a search engine. And we think about today, like what I've heard people say is like, what you just stated, it's too difficult to have a full separate platform. And so what I love about the engineering team at Bing is that we're actively going out and listening to our customers and saying, what are your hangups? What is it that is causing you to not either want to or have enough time to do this? And so one of the features that our engineering team developed, which I don't know how many people know about it, is the fact that you can now essentially port in your Google data and you can choose how often you do it directly into your Bing accounts. So if the and I hate to say this, but if the excuse is you just don't have time to make the updates and changes, we've tried to remove that barrier and say, great, you can link the Bing account to the Google account. So if you're optimizing, if you're making updates, tweaks, and changes, it can actually automatically port over into your Bing account, and it'll send you an email notification telling you when it's done. And I have multiple friends in the space. There's one I was visiting in the March timeframe, and I love that his Apple Watch would ping him and let him know, yep, his Bing import was done today. There were no issues. Good to go. And let him know if there was an issue, so he knew to log into the account and make updates or tweaks or changes if something didn't port over correctly. But it goes back to, what are the barriers and how can we like them to make sure that you're getting the reach that you need as a brand, that you can, I know being in-house, my challenge was I always had to grow. There's an expectation that I'd have minimum 10% growth year over year over year. Well, if you're doing the same thing and not making updates, not making changes, and not expanding the networks and the reach you have, that 10% growth gets pretty difficult to hit.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I love the example of everybody getting along. Obviously Google ads importing into Bing and getting notified on an Apple Watch. That's the world we live in today. So that's a good example. I think an excuse is the right thing to say. People have excuses for not doing something. So taking away their excuses, I'll use that term, you don't have to, is a great way to become that. Because this is, one of the few cases where Microsoft is the underdog and where, you can make some major impact, which is really cool.
Yeah. And I'd say, I've been there. I've managed in-house. I've been agency side. I've been agency side where you're like, why are we not doing this? And people are like, I just don't have the time. It's like, well, not having the time isn't really a great excuse. If we're being hired as an agency to manage on behalf of our clients and we can easily reach 30% of the market, why wouldn't we take the extra 10 or 15 minutes a week to put that into our project plan? Why would we not be doing that? Because it makes us look amazing to our clients, or in-house. It makes us look amazing to our boss to show, look at what I've done, look at the growth I can achieve. And then just making sure, I think something I've spoken about at conferences and events a little bit less for the last year or so is auditing. knowing what's happening in your accounts, but just having a regular chance to go back and look at your accounts, look at the performance, look at the settings, and audit to make sure it's still working and functioning the way you expect it to. That way you can always be finding areas that maybe weren't quite set up the way you thought they were or aren't performing the way you thought they were, and going back and just putting in the roadmap of check it, look at it, make updates, changes, optimize, and keep on moving on to make sure that you're capturing as much demand as you can.
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool. I'll ask some more questions about what you're doing now, but I'm just continuing on the career arc. So you were at Microsoft for quite some time, and then not, at least according to your LinkedIn. So I don't know if you can talk about this or if it's a good thing, a bad thing, but just how did things round out? How did you decide to round things out with your career and your learning?
Yeah, so I loved what I was doing at Microsoft, but what I found was that within search, I could essentially go to a new division, new team, and I was doing the same thing over and over again. And it was a challenge because I'd set everything up from the ground up, both their organic and the paid search, but then I wasn't really learning as much as I wanted to learn. So I decided to leave Microsoft because I wanted to get some extra experience, and I knew that it would only make me stronger in the future. So I ended up going to a tech startup that had just received its first round of funding, where I was the only person doing anything related to marketing or product marketing at that company. And it was like a 30-person company. I was the PR person. I was the website, the content. I did everything soup to nuts, and it was an amazing experience, but we didn't quite get enough funding for me to stay on board. From there, I ended up having a couple like consulting jobs on the side because I wanted to find the right next job. And I knew I wanted to stay in search. I didn't want to go too far from either organic and paid. I could have done social, but I really love search. So I ended up going over to Harry & David, where I could manage both their organic and paid. And it actually gave me the opportunity to dig into an area I'd never really spent a lot of time in, and that was comparison shopping. Like, I'd been on the back end of a comparison shopping engine, but I actually didn't know how those different tools worked. And so Harry & David was a ton of fun to be able to actually manage SEO strategy for an entire company, paid strategy for an entire company, shopping comparison engines for a company, and how they play together. And really, it was a small but great marketing team because we all worked together to say, instead of us thinking about our silo, how do we create a unified, holistic plan? And our VP of marketing, Jeff Allen, did a great job of making sure that we actually had plans that came together, that no one person had their own plan. It was all, how do we work together to create a customer experience where they don't know that it's 6 individual people managing different programs, which to me was a big shift in how marketing could be done, where it's less of the silo and more that integrated campaign, integrated strategy. And from there, I decided we moved to Southern Oregon for that. And my husband and I decided we wanted to go back up to Seattle. And so I ended up going over to Expedia. And with Expedia, they had an opportunity that actually wasn't paid search, but it was similar to paid search in 2006. So from a career progression, I decided to sort of hop out of the paid search space for a little bit. Because I had the opportunity to join what they called MnSearch, which is like TripAdvisor, Trivago, Kayak, and create sort of a bidding optimization strategy and platform for something very similar to search related. And so it was like going back to the heyday of search in the 2005, 2006 timeframe, where the rules were just getting written and figuring out how do you do the marketing on that side. And I got to work and mentor a couple of the people on the paid search team and meet with them regularly to keep my fingers in it. But I got to go back and help something that was getting off the ground in a space like travel, which was phenomenal because I love to travel. And so it was a lot of fun to do that. And I decided, spent a couple years there working on the MnSearch team, building out and developing like, how do you do what you do, before going agency side to get the experience again, about 10 years after the fact of what is it like managing client accounts? Is this something I want to do permanently? And I decided I loved agency side, but I love in-house even more just from what you can do from a strategy standpoint. And when this opportunity at Microsoft came up, to sort of be I like to call it the John Dwayne of Bing, because I'm a little bit John Gagnon from the paid search side, but also Dwayne Forrester from the SEO side. It's like a dream job because I get to do both organic and paid search, and really be an advocate both for Bing Consumer and Bing Paid as the voice of the customer.
That's awesome. I like the John Dwayne a lot. Let's see if we can get our artists to like create this beast that's the John Dwayne. That's pretty great. I don't have any artistic skills myself, but we'll see if we can find somebody to do it for us.
Well, and it's fun because there's just I love the fact when I was at Bing in 2009, I remember our goal was to get to if we can hit 13 to 15% market share. Like we were going to be doing amazing things. And I love the fact we're at 30% on PCs today, 25% on PC and desktop. So we have surpassed the goals when we first launched and got started. Maybe I'm not supposed to say that out loud, but I just love like how fast it's grown. That, yeah, we're the underdog, but it's almost like Avis in the rental car space. We're number 2, but we try harder. You can see that in a lot of things that are happening, a lot of things that we do of how can we create great customer service? How do we get a good user experience? How can we test new things out without venturing too far from what Google's doing? Because if we make it so that you can't port the campaigns or accounts over, people might be less likely to set up that automation because you have to do a lot more manual in the back end. But I love the fact that Bing has so many really cool experiences that people might not even know about.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I like the underdog angle too, because I would agree that you know it's funny because I've been in this industry for a long time, and you see the market share reports and everything, and when you think about it, it's like it's from a perspective of there's a report every few months, something will come out, but you don't think that there's people behind the scenes working really hard to make the differences, but on both sides, right? It's like to keep the lead, to cut into the lead, all that type of stuff. And so when you're in that position, you have to try new things. You have to do a bunch of stuff in order to make a gain. And I think sometimes we hear about the raw numbers, but we don't really see a lot of news about what's going on. And I'm sure part of it's proprietary. Like you don't want to give away what you're working on, but it's also sort of cool to think about it from that perspective, because it makes you want variety. It makes you want to see Bing win in that case. So that's really cool.
Yeah, and I think on the cool standpoint, and it goes back to, we were talking about excuses earlier. I love speaking at conference events and just talking to brands, because a lot of times they're so used to Google being number 1. When you ask them like, well, how big do you think Bing is? You'll hear that answer, like 10%. We're like, actually 25 to 33%. And you just see their jaw drop. And they're like, why are we not spending time and resources on that? Like, that's a great question. that even though the numbers are out there, Google became a verb, and we'd love Bing to be a verb, but it's just, you think of the opportunity that when I talk to businesses, it's going 1 in 4 of your customers use something other than the leader in the space. Would you want to shut your door to 1 in 4 people that are trying to find your business?
Absolutely not, right?
No. And when you put it that way, people are like, oh, no, I definitely want to reach that 1 in 4 people. I'm like, great. Well, if you ignore Bing, if you ignore the number 2 search engine, that's what you're doing. And it's 1 in 4 in the US, 1 in 5 in the UK. Like we've got pretty good share numbers. And I think we have over 10 markets where we have over double-digit growth. Might be higher than that. So you think like there's a lot of opportunity to gain by focusing on Bing.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is that from my experience, a lot of times the people convert at a higher rate, higher basket value, higher value of customers. And so not only is it reaching a certain percentage, it's also better money well spent. It's a high ROI activity to do that. And so if you're optimized in one area and you haven't even considered this other, if you haven't considered Bing, or if you're under optimizing it, under leveraging it, then you're leaving a lot on the table.
Yeah, and I think just even talking about optimization, it's an area that I shake my head and go, why are you not using Bing Webmaster Tools? I have to say, Dwayne and the Webmaster Tool teams created some really great analytics, really great tools from an SEO standpoint that if you don't have an account, but you're in SEO, you really are missing out, because it gives you a lot of great information, insights that you can't quite get from Search Console, or at least I guess I haven't logged into Search Console for a couple of months, but I know one of the complaints was that you only had about 90 days worth of keyword data. We don't restrict the 90 days of keyword data. We give you access to all your information from the point you put the pixel on your page. So giving you the information you need to make business decisions, that's something that we've been doing and we continue doing.
For sure. What else are you working on? I actually get some of the audit emails that are coming out from Bing ads. You're doing remarketing stuff. Tell us about the awesome stuff you're doing.
Yeah, so I keep very busy, in part because I have so many different interests that it's not that I have ADHD, but there's just too many really fun things that I can investigate and dig into and try to figure out, like, how do we make better experiences? How do we get more information into the hands of our customers? From a paid search standpoint, I've been spending a lot of time doing things like figuring out how do we do a better job with audiences and remarketing. This last week, I've actually been delving in and creating, I'm hoping it'll be like the ultimate audience checklist. So how should you think about developing your audience lists? What are the questions you need to be asking to think about how do you create audiences, and not only create them, but really understand them and then start to figure out how you layer them together to create a better, more targeted campaign.
It seems almost like a no-brainer to do that, right? You would talk differently to somebody you're familiar with than you would if you've never met before. So why wouldn't you do the same thing on search?
Exactly. Or if you know that they've purchased from you in the past, but they're coming back and coming in on like your brand term, maybe you would take them to a different page or take them to different content than somebody who has never interacted or purchased from your brand before. You have different messages, different offers, different experiences, depending where someone has engaged or interacted with you in the past. And an area that I love talking about that some marketers get it, but for some reason I don't understand why more marketers don't, is that when you're creating remarketing lists and you're looking at your remarketing, it's not just about your web traffic. It's also about all the other marketing channels that are sending traffic into your website. So we have so much rich demographic data through social media. Now there's some flaws with that, because if you're only reaching people you've already reached in the past, you're not going to be expanding out to the new list, but that's where you need to have social campaigns that are doing the acquisition side, and then search is harvesting that demand that you've already generated through the other channels. But just a way to sort of optimize.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not so much about, I mean, sometimes a lot of people's focus is on whether they're going to miss something or not, but it's not like you're missing. I mean, when you have a limited budget, you're missing out when you run out of your budget anyway. So it's like, people always worry about, we're not going to be able to reach every single person if we utilize remarketing, if we utilize lookalike audiences or something like that. You wouldn't be able to reach them if you just ran out of budget. If you used your entire budget on $40 or $50 keywords, it's not going to last very long either. So it's just one or the other. And this is it's a much more valid hypothesis that these people who have had some interaction with you or look like people who have interacted with you are going to be more likely to buy in the future.
Exactly. And so many campaigns I've worked in have had limited budget. Well, I've had a couple of campaigns where we essentially had open pocketbooks, and I love that. It's more fun for me working on those limited budget campaigns because you have to be scrappy. You have to be creative with how do you reach, engage, and optimize. You can't just set it and forget it. You have to go in on a regular basis and try and test new things in order to keep budget coming in. And I love that.
Absolutely. And it sounds like you have a lot of impact for both businesses and within the organization that you work with, just to get that out there. So you can do the evangelism through speaking, which is how we met through your, the numerous speaking events and training things that you do, being an evangelist at Bing. And then also, because you have such a big impact of the audience, you can reach out to people that way too. So it's sort of like you can get people at both ends to start changing the way they think.
Yeah, and that's even like I know when you and I met at MnSearch, some of the things I've been working on also are a little less search focused, a little more forward thinking in terms of how should we be thinking about the shift in advent in technology, which is another sort of passion area of mine. Is, like I said, in the early 80s, I was using a Commodore 64. There's not a lot of kids under the age of 10 that were probably playing on Commodore 64s at the time. They're maybe Atari. But it's looking at some of these technologies that are coming out and figuring out, like, how is that going to shift what we do as marketers? Regardless whether it's search or some other experience, how should we start to think about the role technology plays in our day-to-day lives. How do we think about everything from artificial intelligence to virtual reality, augmented reality, digital assistants, and how is that going to shift what we do from a brand perspective? So I'm fortunate to be at Microsoft because I can work with the Cortana team to say, hey, what insights can we glean from how consumers are engaging and interacting today? And how do we help marketers prepare for that shift before it happens or as it's beginning to happen so that we don't wind up with this whole thing that happened back in 2012 where starting 2007, every year was going to be the year of mobile. And it didn't happen. And so brands and marketers kept on putting off the shift of making everything mobile compatible. Until the press was hit and it was over 50%. And then everybody was panicked and running, going, oh my God, the world is ending. Prepare. How do we stop that from happening? By getting information insights today.
Yeah. And I think that's the hard part. And I'm fascinated with with voice search because I dabble in and out of it depending on my situation, but I know that it's important, but also the platforms provide us with that information. Like, how do we know if something's a voice versus a text search? I know that I've seen demonstrations and I've seen talks about, just what you can tell based on what the query is or something like that. But would Bing Webmaster Tools or Google Webmaster Tools actually tell you that it was used on that? Would it be able to separate it almost like an image search or different other search engine types?
What I can say is I think that's coming. It's not here yet. And part of it is just that there's different data sources. And what's really great is I spent some time this morning on a panel with Google and Amazon. And we were actually talking about this as a challenge is that the data sets, because it comes in from so many different devices and so many different tools, it's connecting the dots and then figuring out what's the right way to show that information. So it's not that it's impossible. It's just that it's connecting the dots on the back end today to get the information that's relevant, to get the information that's actionable. What I will say is I've spent time with our Cortana team, and how consumers are interacting is interesting because you think about, okay, they're going to a digital assistant. What are they trying to do? And we talk a lot about voice search, but voice search is only a portion. And the search component's a portion of how consumers engage and interact with a digital assistant. There's times when it's not really even recorded in because they're doing a specific action like scheduling an appointment. It doesn't issue a search result. And so there are different ways that people engage and interact that are still pretty interesting to figure out, like, how do we analyze it? How do we look at it? Things like if I'm on my Windows 10 PC, Cortana is integrated into the toolbar below. We see people interacting with that almost as if it were a search bar where they're trying to find files. They're trying to engage with specific apps and or programs. Is that as interesting to a marketer as the actual voice search queries that are generating web results? And it's sort of an interesting way to look at it is how are people engaging? What are the different things they're trying to do? From a voice search perspective, we get a lot of really great query data. And the query data is a small percentage of overall interactions and engagements.
It's really interesting. I actually never thought about it that way. I like that answer a lot because I think of it as voice search going into a search engine becoming a marketing prospect. But it's got to be a very small percentage of the overall times that somebody uses a voice search. It's not always going to a search engine, first of all, and it's not always a marketing message by any means. It's probably more navigational than anything. Almost like typing in a URL into Google's, into Bing and typing in the URL. Sorry.
Well, and it's interesting when we look of like there's different things people engage with it. Part of it's accessing apps. It's accessing different files or tools using essentially voice search as one way or type in search if you're on your PC. I will say a lot of people consider it more natural on your PC to type something into that Cortana box than to actually speak to it because it's a learned behavior. We're used to typing. We're not used to talking to our computer yet. We do see people test it and try it on a regular basis, and we see that usage is increasing. But you also see then the actions they're trying to take. We look at they do device commands, they do app engagement or engagement with tools within the machine or device. Then when you start to look at, okay, what's that next level going into like voice search? Well, some of it's the chit chat. It's the funny questions people ask that really you wouldn't think of it as a web search, like tell me a joke. How are you doing? Who's your daddy? Where is Master Chief? What does the fox say? You have all these different sort of And we have one for every single animal under the sky. What does the dog say? What does the cat say? Going through the logs is pretty entertaining. And then it's also device specific with how they engage and interact. I don't know if you knew this, but Cortana's on the Xbox. So it's really fun to see how many Xbox gamers are trying to find hacks and cheat tricks while on the Xbox to figure out how to solve a percentage of a game and go to that next level. You can see that when you start to look at the voice search interaction with Cortana on the Xbox. They're doing different types of actions based on the context and the device they're using.
Yeah, for sure. So it sounds like the market's more fragmented than what we're used to. I mean, we thought it was a lot of trouble to deal with mobile versus desktop, and now we're incorporating other mediums like even like a Alexa, the Echo, whatever it's called, that I got my parents. That's one thing, and they use that completely differently than you would use a phone, than you would use a gaming console, than you'd use a computer. And it sounds like part of it is getting an answer to be solid. You've mentioned AI a few times and machine learning. I think I'd like to talk about that a little, talk about that and how you see that going in the future. But more than anything, I understand now where that's completely necessary. And that is that we can't anticipate what people are going to look for until they start doing it, but they're using these things in ways that we never intended and in different ways. So to provide that information in like a Webmaster Tools report, is it the duty to reply or to say whether Xbox users are accessing somebody's website? And is there even a concept for a website when that happens? That type of stuff. I think I agree that it's more nuanced than we might think to just make that data available. It's not in the same paradigm we're used to. So if we're looking at websites and we're looking at data on websites, then what is owed to us? Is it really just interactions with our website, or is it interactions with our brand, like our brand name? How do you distinguish those things? It opens up a whole new can of worms from what we're used to.
Exactly. And on that can of worms side, I think it's something that I'm trying to figure out how to provide better answers on. And I'm working with our equivalent to the knowledge graph team to understand, like, what guidance should we be providing brands as it pertains to appearing in the knowledge box, being that voice response answer. So when you ask, hey, Cortana, where is the nearest Hilton? That Hilton is the one that should be showing up in the knowledge graph. How do we give guidance on the optimization on that? And actually, there's a woman that came up to me after an event about a month ago that the question she asked was phenomenal. She goes, I work for the brand Steel, Stiehl. How do I do voice optimization for my brand when it keeps on thinking Steel, Steel? And how do I optimize? I'm like, that is a great question. I actually don't know the answer. That's something we're going to have to investigate because there are enough brands that sound like other words. How do you, from a machine learning point, differentiate Steel versus Steel?
Yeah, absolutely. And then do you favor the ones who have given you the information on a silver platter, or do you make it so that does the engine discover those answers and then try to come up with the best one? Or do you meet somewhere in the middle? I think that it's probably a combination of that. I think that any brand, many brands, not many, a handful of them, if you said, here's the exact things you can do, you can provide us that will make you rank or show up in these results, you would probably get some people who would just do it. Like, that's just part of how they work. And then a lot of them would sort of fall behind, or they just wouldn't do it. And so that's the difficult piece, is you can't overly favor somebody. We've seen that happen throughout the history of SEO, overly favoring the early adopters. How do you not do that yet get what you're looking for as a business?
Yeah, that's something that's an interesting case. That one of the questions that's come up is right now, structured data is one of the ways that the search engines have more context behind the internet and content and brands. Should there be a different way to structure the data to make it more amenable to voice search and natural language processing? Is that like the next project I need to be working on, is working with the schema.org folks to figure out how do we create different categorizations that is part of the schema so that it makes it easier for voice search to interpret, to understand. And do we say, here's Steel could also be these things. This brand can also be related to X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. And not only that, is it going to become part of our consciousness? Because when you could write a business book now and say, never name your company something that is pronounced the same way as a dictionary word. That's now like a new brand guide or something, where never name your company after something that could be confused. And is that valid, or did the computers figure it out? I think on a long enough timeline, the machines are going to figure it out. That's like the one thing I'm certain of, is that it's going to be a challenge to solve it. It's going to take time, but eventually they'll know. They'll have enough knowledge that they'll know that the difference between steel and steel, even though it sounds the same and I pronounce it the same way, they'll know that based on something, whether it's your history, whether it's your location, whether it's the twang in your voice, these things are going to get smart enough to notice that, or at least have a pretty good lead on what somebody means. It's just, and when that comes, do you want to be the one who then says, okay, now I'm going to care about this? Or do you want to be the one who at least considered it all along?
Yeah, and it is interesting when you think about where we've come, because I remember trying to use some of the voice dictation software back in it must have been the early 2010s, and it was not exactly amazing by any means, that it got about maybe a third to a half of what I said correct, because I was hoping I could, I do an 8-hour car ride to visit my parents, and I was hoping that I could write blog posts by dictating while driving, just multitask, because I always am trying to do multiple things at once. It didn't work at all. But if you think about today, through natural language processing, they've actually gotten what they call the word error rate. It used to be in that 20 to 30% range, which is pretty not amazing in terms of how well it understands us. Now it's about 5%, which puts it about the same level as a human translator or transcriptionist. So it still doesn't understand everything we say, and it still will have issues with words, phrases, pronunciation, but it's better. And it's getting to the point where it's easier for us to engage and interact with, because it can understand us so much more.
Yep, for sure. And I've noticed that as well. I mean, it's gotten better and better every time you use these things. And especially for those who don't use them all the time, it's like each iteration, it just gets better. Because I agree with you. I've tried to do blog posts the same time around 2010 or so. I tried to do blog posts in the car too, because that's when I'd always have my good ideas, when I wasn't in front of a computer. And so I would dictate it into Evernote and then, see what it came up with. But a lot of that stuff was unusable because you couldn't remember what you were thinking about because of the error rate, for sure, and it never made sense. And then if you can get to a reasonable amount, then we can be more productive. We can get a better, we can use these things there, and then that's going to lead to more saturation. That's going to lead to more trust. That's going to lead to more people using them, and that's going to lead to adoption of the platforms, which means they're going to be able to get better. They're going to get better and better.
Exactly. And then when we also think the adoption of the platforms, right now, a lot of it depends on trust. It has to be a trust relationship between the consumer and the technology. And it's almost the do no evil with the data and information you have access to. You have to use it, and you have to use it regularly so it learns from you. It learns how you interact, what you interact with, and giving it access to data and information so they can learn based on what you do. What's interesting, and I love that we found this we did a survey back in the February timeframe to how are people using voice search? What do they like? What do they not like? What are they doing? More, less, the same of? And what it came up with was essentially doing something simple like asking it a question or trying to find information. The average person is very comfortable doing that. And they're doing it more and more often on different devices, ranging from your phone to your desktop or your computer to a smart home speaker like the Alexa. But what they aren't doing as often is the complex tasks. When I say complex, I'm thinking things like trying to book a restaurant. So I'm asking it, where can I eat nearby? Where's sushi? But then you go to try to take that next step of actually making the booking. That's where it's failing today. Or making an appointment, booking travel, etc. That more complex scenario is where it's breaking today, because the bridge between the voice search technology and the technology that completes the task hasn't completely been built for a lot of the brands today. And so that's a huge opportunity that brands and companies can think about is, how do you get the consumer from asking the question to taking the action? And a lot of times you already have the technology built in on the back end of your systems in terms to get it to an action. But how do you enable it from a voice perspective? Or is it a voice search then links you into the app, and the app helps you take that next action or step. It's a little bit when you talk about voice skills, like Alexa, you have, I think I've heard 17,000 voice skills through Alexa. I think we have like, I don't know the number through the Cortana skills framework. We have a lot of skills where you ask it to do something on your behalf. I think that's sort of where we're at for that next phase of AI machine learning, is going up from information to action. And as marketers, figuring out how do we bridge that connection? How do we make sure that whatever action we want consumers to take, that it can be done, and that we're making it easier for that step to happen?
Yeah, and I it would be interesting to see if brands ever can fully harness that, or if it's more of like an interface and interaction between the platforms, almost like a organic search opportunity to have some kind of pilot program where you can make it happen. So, for example, I would love it if I could just call up and say if there's a reservation available at a restaurant, or like what's the best rated restaurant nearby, and can I get a reservation? And then if it could search for it, come up with a list, and then go through to Quotable and make that reservation, knowing my details, that would be amazing. Because the process takes quite some time to make it work and to happen. And so, but who would be the one to, how do you make that work? That's going to be the $1 million question for brands. I think that for each brand to do that individually, it's going to be, again, maybe 5% or less early adopters who do it, and the rest are going to be like, well, I think this is going to really impact us as well, or something. So there's no business case for doing this. That's the hard part.
Yeah, but what I'd say on the hard part for that is there's actually things available today that help take that next step. And I love the example you gave, because if you think about chatbots, and talking with our Cortana team and talking with the AI team and how they're thinking about this, is right now the goal is you'd ask your digital assistant, you ask Cortana to do something, and Cortana would essentially reach out to the bots that are available today to ping them and get the information, and then come back to you and say, you know what, I pinged OpenTable. Here are the restaurants that are available. Which of these would you prefer? Do you want me to go ahead and make that booking for you? Is it for 2 people? Is it for 5? Because there's some information it could go ahead and just assume it's you and your wife, so it's going to make a booking for 2, but really you have 6 other people in the background that you also want to have on that booking. So I think one of the interesting things is, as we think about AI and technology, some of it is getting developed today, when it's like chatbots are more than just answering FAQs. They can be used to help take that next step and that next action. Some of it is going to be on the brand side to make sure that they have bots that can engage with the digital assistants and engage essentially to do what I'm calling, like, you have digital assistants, it's moving to intelligent services instead of just answering questions. Yeah,
no, I like that. That's really interesting, because I think about another use case, and that is like I just implemented a CRM system, and it's really fun to play around with CRM to see where they've come along, because I have used them in the past, and then now to see what the modern ones do. But it's like, could you use a voice assistant to talk about the results of a sales call you had, or some kind of opportunity that you went through? Could you just summarize it to a voice assistant and push it in there? Because that would save a ton of time just to like prospect it that way. I found that voice is really nice for giving instructions to team members. It's really nice for a lot of different things that can't be replicated efficiently with text. And so I like this idea of intelligent services, that it's not so much that, yes, I mean, the way that you can get ahead, I mean, because I always think of this from a marketing perspective too, and that is, can you draw new users as a result of being an early adopter or just an adopter of this technology? I think for OpenTable, for the end point, yes, it makes perfect sense. But what about the rest of the people that are involved with this? Like, how do they get involved? How do they get to the point where it makes sense in their area? And I think that part of it is just trying new things, set aside a budget in order to do that. The other thing is to think about the end result of if this worked. Like, if this is the future, it's not so much that you're going to get 2 new users today. It's that you now have a replenishable amount of people who are going to continue to use your service, because you're the one who's in the database of web services, or the chatbots, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
So that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, and I have to say, like, as you mentioned, like, there's complex things that you and I probably do on a regular basis. We both travel quite a bit. I'm preparing to head to an event in Munich, Germany, Oktoberfest timeframe. And I'm trying to think like, okay, right now I have to book my ticket through a corporate system. My husband's coming with me, so I have to book his through a different system. I just want to be able to give it, here's the parameters, here's roughly my budget. You come back to me with all the options instead of me spending 75 hours trying to manually figure out every individual flight. I would rather have a bot do that on the back end and then come back to me. Here's the 4 or 5 things that hit the descriptions you have asked for. And just making it so I'm that much quicker to action, and I'm spending more time doing things I want to do and less time doing the things that I sort of have to do in order to get to the action I want to take.
Yeah. And it's not that far-fetched that would happen. I mean, I use TripIt to organize my travel, and all I need to do is forward the receipt or just have it connected to Gmail, and it just works. So it's like, it shouldn't be that hard to go out there and, almost like what, I don't know if I know Microsoft had the Bing flights, like where it would tell you if it's going up or down. It used to be called Faircast, I believe.
Yep, that is correct.
Do you still have that?
We do.
Yeah. Can that program, can that, once the data is there, can that be something where people get hooked into it, or they have the opportunity to do that, and they can, you could even make it a sponsored opportunity to book the trip through the OTA that wants to use that handed it to them on a silver platter.
Well, and that's an interesting point. And I know Jeremy Holovi Prospect and I, we've spent a lot of time actually chatting about that exact thing of like, right now, digital assistants, intelligent agents really aren't monetized. And I think the companies like Microsoft were trying to figure out how would we monetize this, because we don't want to erode the trust of the users. If the users feel like you're pushing advertising or marketing to them, they might not find the value in the services on the back end. So it is for digital assistants, there's a very fine line between advertising and engagement, advertising and use cases. But then when we think about how consumers are using it, when I ask Cortana a question like, hey, Cortana, book me a flight going to Munich, Germany on September 15th, coming back on September 23rd. How does it know which brands to look into? How does it know which airlines? How does it know if I want to book it via the airline directly or an OTA? And I think that's going to be the big question, is like, how does this evolve? And I think it is an open question. We don't have an answer today, is how does the digital assistant know which tools, services, brands to engage and interact with? Is it based on what I've liked on social media? Is it based on the apps that are on my phone, that it assumes loyalty and or preference based on the data and information it has access to? But then if you're a brand new company, how do you get out in front of consumers? How do you build that brand loyalty? I think there's a lot of questions that are getting asked as the technology is developed, that we're trying to figure out, like, what are the scenarios? What is going to happen from a marketing perspective? And how should marketers be thinking about getting in front of and staying ahead of these shifts and changes as they're happening?
Yeah, and that's the interesting pieces, because a lot of these things are for the knowns or for the public information. But how do you do an assistant around private information? I would love it if an assistant could have all my points balances for the different airlines and my travel schedule my preferences. Like, if I could do that, if I could get it so that Cortana wanted to know all that about me, like they wanted to know my Delta Airlines balance, or they wanted to know my preferences, and I could tweak that, then it could come back with answers. And then in absence of that, it could come back with answers that are sponsored or something like that, or it'd just be clear that, hey, there's a sponsored answer, and then there's the preferred answers. I mean, that would be amazing. I actually, those are the types of things that would make me get on board, is just to say, hey, tell me the 10 flights that are the 10 best flights to Munich around this time.
Well, and would you want to use your points for it, or do you want to pay cash? Is it some combination of both? Yep. Is it you have enough points to go outbound with one airline and inbound with or return with another? And I think those are great open questions that have to get answered. And it goes back to, I think I mentioned before, trust. The privacy is a huge concern as well. And I have to say, at Microsoft, we take privacy very, very seriously. Yeah. And so it's figuring out, like, what information data do we use? What is considered private information? How do we make it so that we don't erode the trust? Because if you erode the trust, then the technology, it's going to be that more difficult to get in front of the technology and create amazing experiences or seamless experiences for the customer.
Yeah, this is really fascinating to me because everybody's always looking for like the handed on a silver platter use case for when this is going to happen and the date that it's going to be perfectly handed to them, that they have to worry about it or that they have to think about it. I think we're in agreement. I think anybody who's listening to this is in agreement that that's the outcome that we're going to get, is that these things are going to be smart enough and be able to do it. The hard part is, what's the role of the marketer? What's the role of the business that's trying to get their services marketed? What's the role in the platform, like your company? What's the role of the consumer? That's going to be the interesting piece of it. And I think it's going to take time to figure it out. But ultimately, everybody's going to have a role in it. Every one of these people is going to have a role in it. And it's whether or not you want to be ready for it, whether you're going to be ready for it, if you're going to have to like take years to figure it out afterwards. So I think just dabbling and playing around and using it in your personal life is a very good first step.
And to answer your question, Jeff, when does Skynet, or when does it take over? Well, Skynet becomes self-aware at 2:14 a.m. Eastern time, August 29th, 1997. And then the world ends. No, I love the quote from Terminator, and I love trying to see if I can bring that in. No, that's when it happens. No, 20 years ago. No.
It's crazy, isn't it? No, this has been great, Christi. I really appreciate learning about you, but then also seeing your passions for the future of this area.
Well, thank you. And the pleasure is all mine. It's been really fun chatting with you. And I know I'm looking forward to seeing you at the next event.
Well, that was an awesome conversation. From the early days of MSN to the future of Cortana, Christi has had her hands on the pulse of search marketing for decades. And from our conversation, I have a feeling that Christi is going to be an even bigger voice in the future. I especially liked our conversation about the role that personal assistants will play in our lives moving forward and how this will impact everything that we do as search marketers and consumers. It seems so far away, but the amount of progress that has happened in just this decade is already tremendous. It's only going to get bigger and better from here. So thanks for the chat, Christi. You've made a tremendous impact on the search marketing industry, and I can't wait to see where you take things in the future. For show notes, visit jeffalytics.com/Olson.